Oh, okay. Door was open. So welcome to the final session of PEPM 2024. Maybe the final session of PEPM, no, hopefully not. I have a very privileged position here. So my name is Fritz, and I'm the session chair, but I'll spend a lot of time introducing the session to you, because in part because our first speaker, Deaton Jones, couldn't make it for the presentation, which is actually his privilege, you could say, neither here nor online. So what is this session about? So this session is both looking backwards, but in reality also looking forward. So it's about the history of PEPM. Many of you actually, some of you maybe are not even old enough to have been born when PEPM and some of the work was conceived of and started. So to give you a little bit of an idea of actually the history of this quite long-running sequence of workshops and symposia. And this has been worked jointly with some colleagues here, but I'll be very careful to point out that I've taken the privilege of exploiting that. I had to prepare this today with very few, I shouldn't even say plural hours. So I'll take this as a privilege to make this a rather subjective and a little bit hasty reflections, and hopefully to also engage you. It's late, 1600 hours, so you're welcome to comment. Some of you have been there, and some of you will give actually your own presentations later on, which are all keynotes and invited presentations. So just to set the stage, so what is this is a very short history of PEPM. It's even shorter than the book's called A Short History of. So 1971 is like a critical year. Yoshihiko Futomura published a paper where he described something called partial evaluation and showed that you can represent programs and then write interpreters, and the programs are data, and then you can apply them. And if you have a certain kind of program that partially evaluates one of two inputs, in the sense that it only evaluates actually, but does something really actively with the first input, and the second input is basically symbolic, doesn't have it yet, then you can arrive at some fascinating, actually, in principle, results, namely that you can have an interpreter and turn that one into, partial evaluator, turn that from the partial evaluator, turn that into a compiler, and actually then turn the interpreter via the compiler to compiler generator, in principle. So this was a paper kind of work. So then Valentin Turchin and Andrei Yershov, in back then the Soviet Union, were aware of this work and worked on their own framework for doing this, mostly in the context of a functional programming language, Refal, which is really a language for symbolic evaluation, you could say, and very aggressively having ideas how you can actually perform, this kind of what they call mixed computation, computing with, you get a program, but then computing with static values, real data, and some other data basically being symbolic, they're not available yet. So, and then in 89 and 85 to 89, we've had this work at DIKU led by Deaton Jones. And I'll spice what I'm saying here with a couple of very, some kind of anecdotes. Later on, hopefully we'll get to hear more anecdotes. So I was in 87 to 89. I was at NYU and working in the programming languages group there, working on Settle 2 and type systems for that. And then one of the PIs, Ed Schoenberg, came in and said, it's like he's just seen this work. Some crazy people in Copenhagen trying to make Futomura's original idea work in practice, okay? So he thought this was so exciting and crazy at the same time that we should actually read some of those papers. It's the first time I heard about this. Little did I know that for other reasons, I would end up in 1990, 91 at the very DIKU Institute. But it was my introduction basically to the work on partial evaluation. So a critical part in this one was, and Denis, Bjarne, you gotta look at his and read his very anecdotal presentation of actually how it came about, how he had visited the Soviet Union and met with Andrei Yershov. I talked to, of course, Deaton Jones, and he's the co-organizer of this PEMC, Partial Evaluation and Mixed Computation workshop. Well, have a picture at the end. I hope I have a picture at the end. And organized this in 1987, pulling together, actually for the first time, bringing together physically Futamura, Yershov, I think Turchin was there, lots of other people that you know will be were there. For example, no, Lisp 5 1.5. Yeah, sorry. John McCarthy and various other people who are very interested in basically symbolic computation and the partial evaluation here. So this is basically, sometimes you might think of it as the title of his article, the zeroth PEPM, you could say, but it gathered the community and it caused a lot of excitement. So a lot of excitement came from the fact that actually it was in principle possible, and then you could make it work. There's some new ideas that came out of this one, like binding time analysis, so this was actually then the basis for the series called Partial Evaluation and Semantics-Based Program Manipulation is actually the full name, so abbreviated to PEPM. And over the 3 decades, it has broadened focus. Namely, it's focused basically always on the idea of programs as data objects and their semantics respecting, I would say, processing, okay? So it's basically data. So the focus is on data. Let's do something with the data, but make sure that we don't just, screw it up, like, I don't know, by just, doing something that might be correct or not, but the focus being on both being, creating efficiency, but being semantics preserving. Now, so why a PEPM history celebration? As you know, every time people who celebrate history might be worried about their future, maybe we should be, but the original forum, so PEPM has been, I would argue strongly, has been an original forum for great ideas, okay? So did they arise at PEPM? Probably not, but they were exchanged in a forum at PEPM, and then later on actually kind of dissipated into, like staged, computation. I didn't mention it here. So partial evaluation, practice, staged computation. We've seen some of it is, general forms of constant propagation. They're so widespread and mightily used, you could say that they've moved into other, have moved out and moved into other applications, industrial applications, but also conferences. Okay, so there's a couple of these things, as you can see, and these are in boldface because you will get historically minded and intentionally personal, I hope. We encourage to make them as personal as possible. Introductions with a historical view and a personal view on partial evaluation by Peter Sistoft, and on program transformation by Alberto Petrossi, and on program incrementalization by Annie Liu, who is unfortunately not here, but hopefully you're out there and giving us an online presentation. So more than 10 years have passed since the 20-year PEPM reflections, which were actually also performed, and actually one of the motivations that maybe not so implicit as you can imagine, are the following. The field's founders are not getting younger, okay? So, okay. So, Yoshihiko Futamura, he's very much alive, but was very interested and was very, very actually excited about the project here, but his health is in no state right now, and he sends his best regards to actually contribute in writing or even he doesn't have a voice anymore, basically. So he's not. Andrzej Yershov just passed away some time ago. Valentin Turchin also some years ago. Neil Jones, who was actually expected, when we started with this one, we expected to get a written contribution. His voice was not very good. He unfortunately passed away last year in March 2023. So which just highlights why we're trying to get some of the classics, you could say, on the record in this context. Andrei Klimov, not to be confused with another Klimov in Russia. So he's basically, an exponent of the Yershov-Turchin school from old. He was very much interested, but he could not contribute due to illness, right? So he's in the hospital still, as far as I know. And Dinis Björne, if anybody who knows Dinis, most of you know his son, Nikolai Björne, but Dinis his father, and anybody who's worked in Denmark knows he's been a force of academia, a force of industry, and in general, a force of nature. So I can only tell you this now, Dennis is not getting younger. I think he's 84. He walks on 2 sticks. But when he retired, so people forewarned, there's anecdotes here. When he retired, his retirement lecture was not a lecture. It was a 5-day, so a whole week of retirement lectures, all of them given by, Dennis. So Dennis is unfortunate here. I would have loved you to actually see Dennis in action here, because he's literally a force of nature. So, get out of the way when he came. Now, anyway, but he's really unfortunate here right now. But so we have his record, especially in his unusual style of presenting actually a background of how he traveled around in the Soviet Union and tried to get to visit places he was not allowed to be visiting when he was there, and so on. So read about this. So the last part we try to do is the following: is we try to encourage the founders and key contributors to loosen the reins of stringent academic, whatever you want to write here, academic, restrictions, okay? So you just have to say, like, I don't know, where's the novelty and all these things and significance. Put a very personal touch on it. So this was actually an explicit charge, People have solved it in different ways, but an explicit charge is like, you're not only allowed to, you're required to put your very personal touch on reflecting on the field that you've been a founder of, okay? And the last 20, 30 years doing this one. So saying like, please do actually contribute anecdotes, okay? Please do contribute personal reflections, and in particular on the interplay of academic cultures, personal idiosyncrasies, and motivations behind what you and we usually read in the papers, because that's just the final. It's like watching a movie. It doesn't really tell you how it came about, right? So, and we'll get some great stories from all the invited contributions later on, right after this extremely long introduction. So, so the history of the PEPM History Celebration is so long, it has a history itself. So we talked about it some time ago. So in PEPM'22, the starting point was having invited keynotes by key contributors to the field, you could say in general, but also present at PEPM. So we had talks by Naoki, who's unfortunately not here, Andrei Klimov, as I mentioned, Frank Fenning, who's also been a huge contributor to many of these things, by Peter and Annie Liu. So the idea was then, let's solicit written contributions, okay, written contributions that are not ephemeral and disappear and dissipate into our memories, so other people can read them later on also, with a focus on the early years, okay? So you can imagine also, because maybe they're the older ones, so it's more important, or quite important to get those. So PEPM'23 was actually intended to be the one, but then we still had COVID, and Poplar was in the US again, so I think it surprised a couple of us, because we thought we'd start here in the US, and then, next year then, have a European PEPM, as usually very often the case. So that's the reason we decided to actually then do it this year. And despite late invitations, mea culpa, we had enthusiastic responses, okay? So as I said before, there was actually a resounding positive response, but not everybody could respond. So the title actually of this talk was updated by Ming to also say something about Neil, because Neil Jones, he's unfortunately passed away last March, and this was actually quite rapid. So when I talked to his wife Line, who I know very well, she pointed out that his laptop, a Mac, was open, and he was in the middle of a terminal session where you could see that he was actually working on some kind of self-applicable interpreter. Okay, so he worked on a couple of things, like not only that, but he was very actively working with people and some of the potential collaborators. He's written paper as late as 2023, right? It's published. So he was very much engaged in this one. And then sadly, it was open on the date where he went to the hospital and never came back. So so there's a there's a remembrance. It's only 2 pages. Read it. I think it gives an idea of actually, you know, with titles, what Neil has done in his career, because many people know him for this or for that. So the complexity theoreticians or computability people, they will know him for truth table reductions or p-completeness, or, you know, areas in complexity theory, or, you know, the first sort of solution to the, or, you know, characterization of the spectrum problem for finite model theory. And many of us here maybe will say, what, really? We know him for partial evaluation, for program analysis, for, you know, binding time analysis, for data flow analysis, and you know, semantics-based you know, compiler generation and all that kind of work. Okay, so but what Neil actually managed to do, and it was rather unique, and it's actually a dangerous thing to do. So for you, the young people amongst you, don't do that. It's a career breaker. is actually working not only across doing this and doing that, but actually transporting ideas from programming languages and programming into complexity theory to get new tools for dealing with complexity classes, characterizing them, and showing actually some refined complexity class hierarchies and so on, and taking ideas from computability and complexity theory and putting them into the programming language world, very often by what's called implicit complexity theory, which means like, you know, looking at complexity theory as maybe some kind of way of capturing closure properties by formal languages, you know, classes of languages. And very often you will find out there's lots of people interested in this one, lots of people interested in that one, and very few that actually in the middle there. Well, he managed actually this in a very unique sense. So please read this, because I can't do any justice, but I just want to show you a quote from Neil's Neil Fest, which we had when he retired. 2007, he organized a retirement seminar. It was not 5 days, don't worry about it, a single day. And we had to talk Neil into it. He was like, oh, don't make a big deal out of it. In general, Neil was the kind of person don't make a big deal out of it, so he would be yelling at me right now. So he wrote in his presentation himself that he gave, which was entitled 45 Years of Research and Teaching, he wrote in one of those statements in the beginning, it's like, hey, I made a great discovery in the beginning. I could go into these universities. He grew up in his father was a welder, and his mother was a housewife in the middle of America, literally in the middle of America. He would usually say, I grew up in the middle, no, wait a minute, exactly in the middle of America, okay? So he would say, wow, in a small town where he raided the library, but I could actually do what I enjoyed and even get paid for it, okay? So this was one of those things. So actually, it's a picture of actually where he's giving a presentation at DIKU. And one of the things that he would also highlight is the many publications he caused, okay? And he pointed also out one of them where he was actually top of the line. If you can't see it here, that's the front page, or it's a headline page in the main newspaper in La Réunion, an island, a French island in the Indian Ocean, right? Where they wrote up there, it's not impossible to walk, you know, basically about a crazy guy who walked up the volcano in ordinary street shoes, okay? And if you've seen the shoes, you know, that's exactly what Neil always had on. And of course, he took him up to the peak of the mountain. Great, so some reminiscences. I just want to, whoa. So just show a couple of pictures, you know, of the field and the people. You know, this is Yoshihiko Futamura, an early picture, I couldn't really find much, of Andrzej Yershov. This is Deaton Jones, of course, and this was a Dachstuhl seminar. I think some of you were there, right? So, and that's actually Valentin Turchin. That's a grad student from back then, from Stanford, and there's Deaton Jones and Yoshihiko Futamura, okay. So they met for this Dachstuhl seminar, which was also one of the rallying points for partial evaluation. Sorry. Some other, you know, this was from Neil Fest again, so you can see Torben Mogensen here, with actually mustache, doesn't have that anymore. And Olivier Danvy, who's now in Singapore, who's been actually a major mover together with Charles Concel in establishing PEPM in 1991, okay? And in general, actually been very active, so it's in Singapore now. Here we have Neil and Alan Mycroft. Alan Mycroft retired recently, so this is when you realize luckily other people get old, not only ones, other people only get old, not other people. But you can see here a couple of people here also, like not only Morten Heine Sørensen, who was wrote very interesting papers, but he was already in a state, I guess, that reflected. It was a really great party, okay. Back there we have Patrick Cusot, okay. And in here we have Mulisa Giv, okay. And I think this is Pavel Urzicin, okay. So, Paul, we had a great time. So I wasn't planning on saying all of this at all until recently, so, but I'd like to actually emphasize here, before we go, maybe at the end of the session, to flip our heads towards the future, okay, is looking at, thanks to the PEPM History Federation collaborators, we've worked on this one. So we have Zina Ariola, who's unfortunately not here. She's on sabbatical in Boston, couldn't make it. Sam, who's here. There we go, Sam. Hey. And Yuyo, of course, who's here, right? And we had, and their students, grad students who helped Zach at Oregon, and Yudai at Tokyo, and Frank, I think at, that was Edinburgh then, right? Yeah. And we also got some materials contributions. We solicited some of it. We expected to get 50, but we got 2. Julia Lawal, who provided some missing proceedings, the PEPM'99 proceedings. Thank you very much, Julia. And Neil Jones, who sent actually a picture of the PMC meeting, which is also in Dines's presentation. Okay, so you can look it up, and it also says who's present. So look in the proceedings, Dines Bjarna's presentation. That's it.